In this video, I'm going to tell you the story of how my cats saved my life so that you understand just how important they are to me. When I was turning 30, so 10 years ago, I was living in a toxic home at that point again, full circle. If you have ever dealt with narcissists before, you understand that there are cycles to it because you try to break free and they hoover you back in, and then it gets really toxic and horrible, and then you try to break free and then they hoover you back in, and it goes around and around until either you recognize what's really going on, that you're being manipulated, and you put your foot down, and or you build up the self-esteem to enforce boundaries. And it took me a long time to learn how to do that because I had no positive role models or influences in my life to teach me that, and I had to fully learn it on my own. I grew up with two narcissistic parents. I did not know that my mother was also narcissistic, but she was, and throughout my entire life I was bullied, manipulated. My self-esteem was absolutely targeted and destroyed. I had my head screwed with massively. And when I was turning 30, I was having a nervous breakdown because I was still stuck in my parents' house. And I am not a lazy person. I'm not a stupid person. I am not an incapable person. And I don't have any disabilities that would be keeping me dependent on them. What had happened was I had two parents that wanted me to be dependent on them so that they can consistently remind me that I need them and that I was a loser and that I couldn't survive on my own because I was such a loser. That was the brainwashing that was happening to me, to the point where I had to make a list of the things that I did in the day because they would try to gaslight me into thinking that I didn't do anything. And I'm not just talking about my parents, I'm talking about other family members that were involved as well that I'm not going to name. But basically I was scapegoated, and everyone took out their own personal anxiety and personal self-hate and whatever it was, their negative feelings. They took it out onto me, making me feel like I was the problem for everyone, even though at that point I wasn't even leaving my room. I was so incredibly depressed at this particular junction in my life that I would not leave my room. I was nearly catatonic. I would leave occasionally to go get food from the kitchen or to go to the washroom. I had major agoraphobia, so I couldn't leave the house. One time I tried walking to the end of the driveway and I would just cry and get really bad anxiety. I had a friend come to visit me once and I couldn't let her in because I wasn't allowed to let friends in the house since I was a child. Because if I did, then my father would throw a major fit. One time, for example, a friend, even though I told her that she wasn't allowed in the house, she had her own issues, so she didn't listen, and she went into the house anyways because she thought, I know your parents, they like me, why wouldn't they want me in the house? So she just invited herself in, went in the house, and because of that, my father kicked me out of the house in the rain in my socks. I didn't even have shoes. I think someone may have thrown my shoes outside shortly after that. I don't really remember. I just know that I was outside in my socks, locked out in the rain, and I got in my friend's car bawling my face off, and we went somewhere because I wasn't allowed in the house. This was when I was younger. When I was much younger, and it was just an example of how they would treat me when I would have people in the house. So at 30 years old, I was too afraid to leave the house, and I was too afraid to have people come in. But I had a friend come by just in the front of the house, and she had pointed out to me, she wasn't a very good, emotionally healthy influence either, but she had pointed out to me that I was basically pale as a ghost, partly probably because I was never seeing the light of day. And partly probably because I was depressed. I don't know if I had anemia or something. I don't know what it was, but I was looking like I was dying. I was feeling like I was dying. And yes, that's how bad I felt at the time. I remember telling my mother that I said that if I don't leave this house, that I will unalive myself, because I was so miserable being there. And the reason I wasn't leaving there wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because I had been brainwashed to believe that I couldn't, or that I wasn't supposed to, or that it wasn't time yet. So at some point I told my mother that I was so unhappy being there that I was going to unalive myself. And she didn't even look at me. She just said, "No, you won't," and kept on doing what she was doing. So closer to my birthday, so this is when I'm like 29, as we get closer to my birthday, I become more and more depressed because I'm coming to terms with the fact that my life is nowhere near where I had expected it to be at 30, wanted it to be at 30, how I was working towards something, and I just could not get where I was going. And I felt like an absolute loser, garbage person. And just to add a cherry on top of my misery, the week of my birthday, my younger brother and his girlfriend announced that they were getting married and buying a house the week of my 30th birthday of all weeks. And now, knowing who my brother's wife is and what they're really like, I'm not surprised. Basically, I do honestly think that she reveled in my misery. I was just completely surrounded by toxic people who thrived on making me feel like complete garbage. So, as my birthday is getting closer, and now this happens, I am just diving deep into a hole of misery. And so, since I felt so trapped where I was, because I felt like I couldn't leave, and no one was encouraging me to leave, they were discouraging me to leave, and they kept telling me things like, "You'll never survive on your own, you can't, you'll never get a job, or if you get a job, you'll lose your job," even though I have had many jobs and thrived at them. They were gaslighting me and telling me things that were absolutely not true, as if they were true, telling me that I was lazy and that I wasn't doing anything and that all I did was lay in bed all day or whatever it was. And so I started making lists of what I did during the day to remind myself what I was doing, because I felt like I was doing all this stuff, but then they would tell me, "You never do anything, you don't do anything, you're so lazy." So at the end of every day, I had to read over that list to see, oh no, I did this and this and this and this and this, to the point where I even wrote an entire book in the span of 2 weeks and self-published it, because I was so desperate to try to find a way to get out of there, and I couldn't leave the house to go get a job. And you're going to see many recurring themes from my past to now, and we'll eventually get to them. But I felt like I couldn't leave the house to get a job, and if I did, I would fail. All the things that they told me were true about me, I started to believe them about myself. So I even wrote this book and self-published it in hopes that I could make some money doing something like that, so that I could finally get out of the house that I felt trapped in. The point is, I was doing a lot every single day. At some point around that time, I just lost all hope and motivation, and I truly felt like the only way to deal with myself was to end myself. A few months prior to that, I had adopted these cats. They were still kittens, and they were completely dependent on me. and I loved them very much. In fact, they were the only creatures in the entire world that I felt like I could love safely, and that may even love me back. The fact that I felt responsible for them and their well-being was the thing that kept me alive, because I had absolutely nothing to live for except to make sure that my kittens were well taken care of. And so when I wrote my letter, my final letter, I had written at least one, if not multiple, final letters in my life. And every time I would write a letter before in the past, I would start to think about all the people that I would hurt, how sad my mother would be, how sad my brother would be. And at this point in writing this letter, I realized that these people saw me suffering, demolished, and they did not care that I was hurting so bad. And yet I would tolerate my pain because I was afraid of hurting them. And in that moment, I also realized that they hated me so much that if I was gone, I couldn't fathom that they would care, other than to tell everyone that they cared to get narcissistic supply. I couldn't fathom that people who could treat me like this would cry over my passing. I sat there writing this final letter, recognizing that no one was going to be hurt if I did it. And the only thing that I could possibly think to say, knowing that no one would even care if I was gone, was please take care of my cats. I recognized that they were the only things that I cared about, and that cared about me, and that mattered to me. And I didn't believe that anyone of these toxic people would care as much about my cats as I do. All the choices that I made in my life that were keeping me miserable were to make them happy. I wanted to leave the house so bad and start my own life so bad, but my mother wouldn't let me. And so I stayed there and suffered because I didn't want her or my father to be unhappy. And when I realized that they didn't care if I was unhappy, they didn't care if I was so unhappy that I was ready to end myself, I realized that I didn't have to make decisions anymore to try to make them happy. And that moment freed me. I recognized in that moment that I no longer had to live for them. I no longer had to worry about what they think or how they feel, because they sure as shit did not care about how I feel or what I think. And that freed me. I decided that I would stick around because I wanted to make sure that my cats were well taken care of. I wanted to make sure that my cats had the best life that I could give them, and that they weren't neglected, and that they ate good food and whatever. I wanted to make sure that they didn't get put down prematurely because someone just didn't feel like taking care of them anymore. I chose to live for them because I chose to live because I cared about something other than myself. because at that time I still hated myself. I definitely would not have chosen to live for myself. Since that moment, I pulled myself out of that depression, the deepest depression that I had ever experienced in my life, over the course of a few weeks. And I talk about this in my podcast. And since then, I have been able to really keep those thoughts at bay the good majority of the time. I have healed a lot. I have seldom felt bad to that extent ever again. And anytime I do, the thing that always keeps me here is that I love my cats, and that I know that no one will take care of them as well as I can. And you may disagree. You may think that, well, you live in a van and you shouldn't have. If you really wanted to take care of your cats, you wouldn't love them in a van. Okay. Eat me, first off. Second, I'm doing the best that I can in this transitional point in my life. And my cats are happy the way that they are. They get good quality food, good quality water. They go outside when they want. They have shelter. They get cuddles. They're totally fine the way that they live right now. And I absolutely plan on buying land and giving them more space in the coming future or whatever. So that's the story of how my cats literally saved my life just in existing and being their adorable selves. Thanks for watching.